Get ready to enter a brave new world with your host, Vasant Dar.
Brave New World is supported by the Center for Data Science, or CDS, at NYU. If your organization is interested in engaging with CDS through student projects, please email cdsindustry@nyu.edu. For more color on the podcast and additional commentary, please subscribe to our newsletter at vasantdar.substack.com. Hello, and welcome to Brave New World. My guest today is Deepak Chopra, who needs no introduction. He's a most prolific writer, having written almost 100 books on a variety of topics ranging from health and well-being to the nature of reality. Deepak, welcome to Brave New World. Truly delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's a privilege.
So you've just come back recently from 10 days of silence. And you told me that you do this fairly regularly. So say more about this. I'm really curious. How long have you been doing it? What's it about?
I've been doing it for approximately 30 years now. Sometimes I manage only once or twice a year. Sometimes I manage every 4 months. Usually it's about 7 to 10 days where I go offline, although previous social media posts continue to be posted, those that have been recorded, but I'm not on any technology for the whole time. And I usually don't have a book or anything to read. It's just me and myself, and usually a nice place in the wilderness. It could be the canyons of Utah. This time it was a beach close to West Palm Beach, but by myself. Usually I also take a few boiled eggs and some kimchi and some nuts and yogurt and fruit, but I try not to eat more than once a day or even fast, and drink a lot of kombucha and do about 2-3 hours of yoga and a couple of hours of meditation. There's nothing to do except be alone. So this time I was in a place called Amrit Resort, but I had a room all to myself with instructions not to be disturbed.
And you don't see anyone while you're there? It's just by yourself?
I don't see anyone, no. Now, this particular one that I did, I got to stay at this beautiful resort, but I had a room somewhere on the 21st floor, and then the service elevator to take me to the beach. So that was quite amazing, actually.
And what does it do to you? How do you feel going into it, and how do you feel at the end of it?
Well, going into it takes at least a day or two to kind of, it's a day or two to struggle, because there's a temptation to look at the news or switch on the TV or just check the news on the iPhone. But I usually keep the iPhone away, even though it's available in case of emergency. I put it away. But it takes a couple of days where there is this desire to engage again with the world at large. After 2 days, the mind becomes quiet. And then about 3-4 days into it, there's a beautiful silence and a feeling of a quiet kind of euphoric, peaceful presence. That's all I can say. And many insights, a lot of intuitive insights. I do ask myself questions during this period. So, questions like what I'm turning 79 this month. So I ask myself, what's the next phase? What's the next chapter? And then I get insights. I have a lot of creative ideas for other things like new book or something like that. In fact, I am writing another book now after awakening, and the idea came to me during one of these silent periods. Although the conversation with Don Hoffman was in my mind as I was thinking about it. So I get ideas for books and all that, but more importantly than anything else, there is an extreme lightness of being. The body doesn't feel heavy. The mind feels light. The mind is usually heavier than the body. Your body might have a lot of weight, and the mind technically doesn't have weight, but it is heavier technically, even though it doesn't have any mass. So there is this lightness of being, which is difficult to describe, other than there's a quiet, peaceful presence, but also a mild euphoria, internal sense of euphoria. It's not like taking ecstasy or something like that. So it's not a turbulent high. It's a very quiet, peaceful, but joyful presence. And there is the insight that this is who you are. The rest is garbage. And, then when you come out, it's very traumatic. So, when I came out this time, the first thing I saw was my news feed. All the stuff, all the trauma of the world, the insanity. Actually, the insanity of the world becomes very obvious. You first kill people, then you go rescue them, then you get a peace plan, then you try for the Nobel Prize. And it's, this time I was very struck by the idea that Nobel Prize goes to people who are not peaceful. They have no peace in themselves, and yet they get Nobel Prizes. And it's universal. Every year I watch the Nobel Prize to people who are not at peace with themselves. And yet, they're doing that as another accomplishment. So the insanity of being human is very obvious.
I can imagine this change from what you're describing, the light euphoria and the stillness, and then to re-engage with just total chaos and insanity, as you say.
Chaos. Insanity, actually, it is so insane that it's bewildering that we don't see it everyday life. Everyday life, we go by, we are kind of sleepwalking,
Yes,
asleep, and
sleep.
like biological robots,
yes,
being triggered by people and circumstance into predictable outcomes. And you see that everybody is an algorithm. This is actually, we are no different from a large language model, like a distributed autonomous agent, which is madly trying to get attention, get relevance. I realized that the desire for relevance is such a huge thing. And we clothe it in many ways, purpose and dharma and this and that. But behind it all is cunning hypocrisy. And that cunning hypocrisy is, I need to be validated. I need to be validated. I need to be validated. I need to be relevant. It's all very cunning hypocrisy, kind of masking our motivations with self-righteous morality. This whole business of morality also starts to fall apart because I realized that all this self-righteous morality that we all have, by the way, is cunning hypocrisy.
While you were talking, I was reminded of something I read that you wrote, where you're talking about, try not saying the word I for a whole day or even for a few hours, and you find how difficult it is. I did try, by the way. I didn't succeed for more than half an hour. You just can't help it. It's all I and the ego.
Well, people like Krishnamurti never used the word I. He would always refer to himself as the speaker or, or if he felt angry, he would say anger is arising, you know, which is actually truer as a statement. It's truer because you and I don't own anger or any emotion that surfaces. It's not our personal belonging anyway.
Right, right. By the way, I assume you don't write while you're in this
I
silence.
am tempted to. And so, very occasionally, I have a little notebook and I'll write the seed of an idea, and then put it away. So, yes, I don't do formal writing, but if I get an idea, the seed of an idea, I'll put it there just in case, it is useful later.
So, Deepak, I usually start by asking people to tell us more about themselves, but you don't really need an introduction. But I would like you to retell a story that you told me earlier about what really sort of took you on this path that you are on now, which was to sort of blend in, Eastern spirituality with, Western notions of medicine. You used to be sort of quote unquote a regular doctor and MD, and you still are a practicing one. But tell us about that, that incident that was kind of a sort of a pivotal moment in your life.
I was a student of Seymour, who was then in the 70s, 80s, he was the president of the Endocrine Society. So I'd finished my board certification in internal medicine, and I had also finished my certification in endocrinology and neuroendocrinology. I had a faculty position at BU, at Harvard, junior faculty at BU, Harvard, Tufts, all three medical schools in Boston. And I was very involved with my mentor, Seymour, who was very famous, still is. He's now 101. And by the way, he comes to NYU once a year on the sabbatical. And he still argues with me about the hard problem of consciousness. And if he finds a snake in his garden, he'll catch it and dissect the brain looking for neuropeptides. So he's still doing that. And so he was a true scientist. And we adored him, all of us, because of his integrity and his passion for science. And so these are the early days when neuropeptides were being identified. And there was a new technique called radioimmunoassay, where you could, that at that time, Rosalyn had won the Nobel Prize for it. And she was actually um, she was actually very famous at that time because it was possible now to measure peptides in the bloodstream. And we call them neuropeptides because they were first kind of associated with the brain, although later we found that they were in all parts of our body. So things like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, opiates, and the other peptides like growth hormone and peptides of all kinds. These are basically secreted by the brain, but now we know there's a neural network in the gut for that, in the heart for that. In fact, your entire body has receptors to these neuropeptides. And then the peptides themselves, which are information molecules, feed back to the brain. So there's a bilateral traffic between the brain and the body, and the body and the brain. And these are essentially information molecules, or messenger molecules. But they're also molecules of emotion because, when you have an emotion like joy, for example, or love, you create oxytocin and other things, serotonin in your body. When you have fear, you create adrenaline and cortisol and things like that. So it became obvious that these peptides were molecules of emotion. That was the information they were carrying. And that actually they also were modulators of the immune system. So these peptides, when they're fine tuned and not over aggressive or not too high in their secretion or not too low, they fine-tune the immune system. An over-aggressive immune system can lead to things like autoimmune illness and allergies. An under-aggressive immune system can risk you for cancer and infections. But a fine-tuned immune system leads to self-regulation, homeostasis. So this was for us huge at that time because it was brand new in the scene. Now everybody is talking about messenger molecules and so on.
Now you're talking, this was in the 80s, is that right?
Well, actually, the peptide discoveries all started shortly after radioimmune acids. Let's say 70s, mid-70s, and all through 80s, yes. And so, this was the neuroimmune endocrine axis, and it led to a new field, psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. Psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. And so we were very proud because we were pioneers in this field. In fact, Candace, who was my colleague, wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion. I wrote the foreword. She became the chief of brain chemistry at the NIH at a young age. Unfortunately, she died later of a heart attack because of various circumstances that no need to go into right now. But we thought we were pioneers. And when I met Maharishi, he asked me, what do you do? And I explained to him that I study the molecules of emotion. And then, he kind of asked me to explain. And I did the explanation that I did for you right now. And he kind of thought for a while. Then he said, they're not real. I said, what do you mean they're not real? I spent my whole career and, everything looking at these molecules. And he said, nothing conceptual or perceptual can be real. And so reality is neither conceptual nor perceptual. And, for me, that was brand new thinking. But I kind of accepted his challenge to come and spend a year with him and look at the principles of consciousness as the ontological primitive and matter as a human construct for modes of knowing and experience in consciousness. Realize that the brain is not the source of experience. It records what are called the neural correlates of experience in the form of neurochemistry. But that was a long journey for me personally to abandon what I now call the superstition of matter. Matter is a superstition, but a useful one.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's quite a handful there, and, when I was thinking about our conversation, I turned to ChatGPT, which, as you point out, you say, the deepest wisdom is digitally available, as you say in your digital Dharma. And so I asked ChatGPT, I said, what's the role of the brain in, Eastern and Western, notions of consciousness? And it gave me a summary, and I'll just read out a couple of bullet points, and I want you to comment and, see what you think about this, right? So it says that in the Western view, the brain is the generator of consciousness. It generates consciousness. And mental states are emergent properties of neural activity. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, I'm just sort of condensing it. And then it says that in the Eastern view, the brain is a receiver or a mirror, that it mediates or reflects consciousness, and it goes into Vedanta. And it says the brain and the body are instruments or filters through which universal consciousness is experienced in individual form. And then it ends by saying when the brain is quieted, consciousness is not lost but expanded, which I thought was very interesting. So what was the Maharishi actually telling you when he says it's not real? Was he saying that it's imagined or it's incomplete?
It's a very complex and very long answer. I don't think we can completely answer your question in this time that we have. Even what you read from ChatGPT is very inaccurate right now. Okay, because anybody will agree the brain doesn't secrete consciousness. It's not like the gallbladder, which secretes bile, or your stomach, which secretes hydrochloric acid. And brain is somehow secreting insight, intuition, creativity, imagination, self-reflection, stories, imagination, higher consciousness, transcendence. The brain is a 3-pound piece of meat, and most of it is fat and a little bit of protein and a few carbs and what we call carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, or sugar, and all these things are part of the brain. But when you drink a glass of orange juice, the sugar in the orange juice has no consciousness, but suddenly goes to the brain, and now it has consciousness. It makes no sense whatsoever. Okay, no material object. Here's the deeper thing. No material. That's not just your brain. That's just your body. Your body, your brain, my telephone, here, my iPhone, a piece of rock, the moon, the sky, the stars, the Milky Way galaxy, the trillions of galaxies there, 3 trillion, 700 sextillion stars. None of these are in essence made of matter. They are perceptions, and they are human perceptions and limited human perceptions in human consciousness, which is in turn a modified form of what Eastern traditions call pure consciousness. Pure consciousness is the ontological primitive of the universe in this argument, which means there's nothing behind it. That's a quote from Max Planck. There's nothing behind consciousness. So what is consciousness? It's the irreducible fundamental source of experience. Irreducible, fundamental. It has no form, okay? Because if it had a form, you'd be able to see it. Because it doesn't have a form, it doesn't have a border. Because it doesn't have a border, it's infinite. It's spaceless, it's timeless, it's irreducible, it's fundamental, it has no cause, it doesn't exist in time, and it is ultimately unimaginable, incomprehensible, imperceivable, and inconceivable, but without it, there is no experience. So you can't touch it, but without it, there's no sensation that we call touch. You can't see it, but without it, there's no sensation that we call seeing. You can't hear it, without it, there's no sensation that we call hearing. You can't access it by thought, and yet it is responsible for thought. You can't feel it, and yet it gives rise to feeling. It's the incomprehensible that appears as the comprehensible, as perceptual activity and cognitive activity. And so that's here the thing is. See, if I asked you, let's take a little example. I'll hold my book up right now. So if I ask you, what is this? You'd say it's a book. But that's a human construct. What is your experience right now? Visually, it's color. That's all. It's also shape and it's a form, but essentially it's a color, because without the color, there's no separation between my shirt and this. So let's say everything you're seeing right now on the screen of your computer is colors, and they give rise to shapes and forms. But essentially, the visual experience is color. Now, so if you're a baby, you have no idea this is a book. You're experiencing a color. And furthermore, the color is being experienced in you, in your consciousness. Okay? And then what happens, and also, if a baby is listening to me, doesn't know this is Deepak speaking English with an Indian accent. What is it hearing? Noise. So essential experience, raw experience, is color, form, shape, sound, sensation, smell, and taste. Okay, this is raw experience. Now, what happens is the baby and this book or everything else is one experience of perceptual activity in consciousness. So consciousness is modifying itself as this perceptual activity. Now what happens is the baby grows up to be 1 year old and the mother says, oh, your name is Deepak and you are Indian and you come from the Hindu religion and you're a boy and your family comes from this economic status and your ancestors came from this clan. So suddenly, on that raw experience of perceptual activity in consciousness is superimposed human constructs, which we call conception. Conception is you start thinking, okay? And then the baby now says, I am Deepak, and there's a world out there made of rocks and stars and amoeba and bacteria and plants and other animals, which are all names given to the nameless, formless, incomprehensible consciousness. So consciousness is modifying itself as perceptual activity, which is a species specific, human in this case, but it could be another species, a crocodile mind or a sparrow's mind or a dolphin mind, in which case the perceptual activity is also different because of the different perceptual apparatus. So in other words, the idea that there's a world out there independent of an observer, this is now in the philosophy of science, is called naive realism. And all scientists, including Einstein, was a naive realist, except for the quantum pioneers, the original pioneers, Max Planck, Schrodinger, you name it, what's his name, Paul Dirac, and all the other guys, including Werner Heisenberg. And they were all what they called themselves idealists, where consciousness frames itself into ideas, and the ideas are human constructs that take perceptual activity and give it a name. And this is carbon, this is hydrogen, this is so and so, this is DNA, this is a human body. So anything that you can give a name for, uh, which is a perceptual activity in consciousness, a modified form of consciousness, now becomes a perceived object. But it is that's an illusion. That perceived object is illusion. It's a superimposition on the raw essence of consciousness. Now, in Eastern traditions, that's called Maya. In Western traditions, these days, it's being called a simulation, or you can call it a virtual reality. I think now that we have VR as a technology, you can understand that consciousness is doing the same thing. It is creating a VR experience called body, mind, and universe. And what we're experiencing is a virtual reality and a human virtual reality with, of course, leaky margins. Because, if you have a pet, you have a dog, and you call your dog Peter, and the dog responds to the word Peter, because it hears the sound, but you don't know that it hears the same sound you're articulating. It's like we are in a virtual reality arcade where we are playing virtual tennis or a virtual game with each other. And by the way, this model is now being supported by what is called game theory and evolutionary theory, and some new models of evolutionary theory as well.
Now, you referred to naive realism. So how was Schrodinger different from the others?
No, Schrodinger and Max Planck and Niels Bohr were different from naive realism. They argued, when Einstein said God doesn't play dice with the universe. Niels Bohr said to Einstein, "Stop telling God what to do." You know, so Niels Bohr, and there's a joke now that we now have entanglement. You know what entanglement is? Two particles separated, millions of miles away. You change the state of one by observing it, the other one instantly changes. So the joke is that, Niels Bohr is buried in Copenhagen. Einstein's ashes are buried in Princeton. Whenever Niels Bohr turns one side, Einstein turns the other side instantly. So that's entanglement. They never agreed. And Einstein was tortured because he was troubled. Actually, I told you, I think there's a story of his and Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, and him. They met in 1930 before the war broke out, and Einstein stated his position, which is what we now call naive realism. And he said there's a scientific universe and there's the human universe. And Tagore quickly pointed out that the scientific universe is a human scientist's universe. You can't have a scientist without the human experience. And the human experience is in consciousness, to which actually very graciously Einstein conceded and said, science is my religion. He used that word, science is my religion. And now we actually have this what is the difference between science and scientism? Science is a methodology. And the methodology is very simple. You conceive of an experiment. You have a theory. You do you have a theory. You come up with an experiment. Then you do the experiment. It's either validated or falsified, and everybody repeats the experiment. They get the same results. So science is a methodology for predicting the results of experiments. And it's very good at manipulating what I'm calling virtual reality, because everything that we have as modern civilization, from skyscrapers to intergalactic or interstellar space probes to television and radio, they're all manipulation of virtual reality based on naive realism. And so science is a very good methodology for expanding our experience of virtual reality. It is not a good methodology for exploring the truth, which is consciousness. Where are theories conceived? In consciousness. Where are experiments designed? In consciousness. Where are observations made? In consciousness. So without consciousness, you can neither do philosophy nor science. So why don't you start from there? When you start from there, there's a place for science, there's a place for philosophy, there's a place for religion, because these are systems of thought. Now, my recent, sometimes vitriolic and combative debates with people like Richard Dawkins, who calls himself a militant atheist. So he and I have had many confrontations. I've had confrontations with Stephen Hawking's co-author, also, although he's become a great friend of mine right now because we understand each other's points of view. But there's a difference between science and scientism. Science is a methodology for exploring certain aspects of what we call reality. Scientism is a religion, okay, which means this is the only way to find truth. So I hope that is a brief summary.
No, that's great. And, since we're talking about consciousness, I want to relate what you're saying to two previous guests of mine, Dave Chalmers, who's a colleague and a philosopher of consciousness, and Anil Seth, who, also has a different view of consciousness as something that is the result of the brain making predictions or sort of controlled hallucinations. And to him, reality is hallucinations that we agree on. Dave Chalmers raises this hard problem of consciousness, where he's trying to answer questions like, what does it feel to perceive redness? Or what do we feel like when we see the color green or something like that, based on sort of physical processes, right? how do these viewpoints square with what you're talking about, where consciousness is an inherent part of the cosmos, that it pervades everything?
Okay, so actually, what they're talking when they talk about the hard problem of consciousness, they're talking about how do physical processes generate qualia. Qualia is a unit of experience, like the color red, or the taste of red wine, or the smell of garlic, or the taste of onion. These are commonly used examples of qualia, subjective first person experience. But that's a very limited definition of qualia. Qualia simply means quality of experience. So sound is a qualia. Okay, taste is a qualia, sensation is a qualia, emotion is a qualia, thought is a qualia, imagination is a qualia. In fact, every perceived object is a combination of qualia. Every perceived object is a qualia. What they're trying to do is get out of the discomfort of abandoning physicalism altogether. So they are very close to what the newest, latest philosophy in the West is. It's called panpsychism. Panpsychism means matter and mind or consciousness are inextricably woven into every experience. So, matter is consciousness, in their view, is organized matter. The view I'm suggesting to you, is not panpsychism. It says there is no such thing as matter, period. There's no such thing as a brain, period. There's no such thing as a body, and there's no such thing as the universe. These are human constructs that interpret human perception into certain conceptual ideas which are actually based on modes of knowing and experience in consciousness.
But
So
they're very useful, aren't they? I mean, it'd be hard to function
very
without.
yeah, but that they fail to answer the questions like, why is there existence? Why is there awareness of existence? What is the meaning of birth? What is death? Is consciousness in space-time, or is space-time another construct in consciousness? So you want to go radical on this, which is where I'm going with you right now. But it's not me. It's Adi Shankara. It's Advaita Vedanta, and now it is emerging as a new science. If you talk to and you should do an interview with Don Hoffman, who is a cognitive scientist, University of California. For 30 years, he's been trying to prove that the brain produces consciousness. And finally, he came to the conclusion it's like, rubbing Aladdin's lamp. Suddenly, a genie wakes up. Yes, you rub the brain, the Aladdin's lamp, genie wakes up and conjures up the whole universe. The idea that the brain, a physical object, anticipates or imagines is ridiculous. Even there is no physical object to begin with. The brain is an experience in consciousness. It's this 3 pound thing of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. It has no experience. You put a knife through the brain. Any anesthesiologist will tell you there's no experience. The brain is a symbolic representation of modes of knowing and experience in consciousness. You say, but these guys argued that if you stimulate the optic nerve, you can produce a hallucination, or you stimulate the auditory nerve, you can produce the song or your hearing or something. John Lennon singing Imagine suddenly appears in your consciousness when you stimulate the auditory cortex, or when you stimulate the visual cortex, suddenly you see hallucinations or visual phenomena. The fact is, symbols of reality are so woven into the experience of reality that after a while, you don't know the difference between the symbol and the reality. If I'm crossing the road, I see a red sign at the traffic light, I know it means to stop. So it reproduces the experience. If I tell you to think of a lemon right now, Close your eyes, think of a lemon, cut it in two, squeeze the juice, and start to lick it. So now you'll see your saliva starts to be secreted. There's no apple, there's no juice. It's your imagination that is causing the saliva to be secreted, because the symbol and the actual experience are entangled. The symbol reproduces the reality. And this is what reality, we live in a symbolic representation of consciousness, a humanly created symbolic representation of consciousness. And the symbols themselves are the neural correlates and the brain and the body. Because as I mentioned, the brain, is not the only organ that is functioning as a neural correlate of consciousness. Your entire body. If I tell you, there's a terrorist attack right now around your neighborhood. As soon as I say that, your blood pressure will go up, your heart rate will speed up, your cortisol level will go up, your immune systems will shut down. And all I've told you is there is a terrorist attack around the corner. And I might be lying to you, but you'll have the experience, right? So the symbols of reality, and this is not new, by the way. This is the essence of Sufism. This is the essence of Advaita Vedanta. This is the essence of Schrödinger. Actually, Schrödinger equation. He said, my equation is a mathematical construct for probabilities of experience. And he said, it's my equation, Schrödinger's equation, which identifies every atom in the universe. He said, my equation, symbolic representation of Atman, in his book, 1948, What is Life? And he predicted, by the way, nobody knew about DNA, anything else, but in his book, he predicted that DNA would soon emerge as the symbolic representation of experience, both ours and that of our ancestors. You don't have to argue about this with the Advaita Vedantists. They say, what is DNA? They'll say, it's a symbolic representation of karma meaning experience. That's all. There's only experience and modes of knowing of experience. So if I were to summarize everything in one sentence, it would say you and the universe are made of consciousness. This book is made of consciousness. This iPhone is made of consciousness. The moon is made of consciousness. The stars are made of consciousness. The rocks are made of consciousness. Made of means they are modified forms of consciousness as perception and conception. So, fundamental reality cannot be anything that is perceivable or conceivable. You have to go to the source of conception and perception, which is consciousness. There is only consciousness.
But does this necessarily preclude something being real? I mean, and this is why when I asked in the beginning about whether it is imagined or incomplete.
So it is imagined. Everything that you perceive is imagined. But let's get to a very basic definition of what is real and what is not real in the framework that I'm giving you. Anything that is impermanent and time-bound and ephemeral is not real. Okay, so if I ask you, what happened to yesterday's thoughts? You can't tell me. You can tell me a few of them.
Yeah.
If I ask you, what happened to your childhood? Tell me all the incidents. What happened on your 14th birthday? Unless it was something spectacular, you don't remember your 14th birthday, but you had one. Okay, so every moment of your life, you're actually dying and resurfacing through habitual patterns of perception and cognition. And everything that you consider solid is a moving tapestry of perceptions and conceptions. The Buddha, when he was dying, he said, this lifetime of ours is transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain. And these were almost his last words. Till Ananda said to him, "Who are you? Are you a prophet? Are you a messenger? Are you God? Are you the Messiah?" And he said, "None of the above." Then Ananda said, "Well, before you take off, wherever you're going, please tell me who you are." And the Buddha's last words were, "I'm awake." He had woken up from, impermanence, illusion, dream, Maya, or unreal, avidya, all are words for the same thing. A superimposition on something that is eternal. You can't get rid of consciousness. You can get rid of everything, but you can't get rid of consciousness. I have a practice where I meditate on my death. I imagine my body going to cremation, being burnt, and then, it's kind of immersed in the river, and my body has disappeared. I even can have my mind disappear. But what doesn't disappear is the awareness. Even in imagination, you cannot get rid of consciousness. It's like space. You can't get rid of space, even in imagination, and you can't create space in imagination. And yet, without space, there's no experience. Now, the Vedantists went a little further. They said the space, which you and I today understand as the quantum field, is also an awareness field, because in order to know the quantum field, there has to be a consciousness that knows it. So here, the subject object become one. Subject and object are always one. And what we call separation or perceived separation, multiplicity, is not really separation, it's differentiation. Just like one fertilized egg divides itself 30 times to become the 30 trillion cells in your body, eyes, nose, hair, follicles, they all appear different, but they come from one stem cell. So think of consciousness as the stem cell of the universe, pluripotential, all possibilities, infinite superposition of infinite possibilities of experience. Okay, now what we call physical matter, how do we experience particles in the Hadron Collider? Or how do we experience anything that we call matter? We experience qualia. Even quanta are experienced as qualia, qualities of experience. So next time you go to ChatGPT, ask the following question. Is physical reality experienced as qualia? Is physical reality a construct, a human construct for the experience of qualia, which are modified forms of consciousness? You look it up independently.
I will. I will. You've been talking about consciousness, and you talked about awakening. And, one of the things I was really curious about, and I did ask ChatGPT, as I tend to do a lot these days, I said, what's the closest word in the English language to consciousness? And it said, well, it's complicated, but since you asked me for one word, I'll call it awareness.
It's a good word.
And, you've talked about awareness a lot.
Just so just say awareness is that in which all experience occurs. It is that in which all experience is known. And it is that out of which experience is made. Awareness modifies itself to know itself as experience. So, and that experience is the form of a perceptual activity and a cognitive activity.
Okay, so I want to go a little deeper in this, because you also talked about Maya. And in your book, somewhere you say that Maya is sort of the distraction, right? That it gets in the way of awareness or waking up. Say more about this. How does it get in the way?
So Maya but it's a very interesting word. Maya, when in India, is usually the goddess of illusion, symbolized. So think of goddess too as a human construct, symbolic of illusion. So there's no goddess out there dancing in the clouds. Okay, the goddess itself is a symbolic representation of the trickster archetype or illusion archetype. Maya is a very interesting word. It's related to the word mother. It's related to the word mata. It's related to the word matrika, which is the mother of alphabet. It is related to matter, a human construct. It's related to time. It's related to meter. It's related to music. And it's related to matrix. So it's a very interesting word. This one word, the etymology encapsulates everything from the matrix to music to matter to time to measurement. Oh, measurement is also Maya. So, what is Maya signifying? It's what measures infinity, which is formless, into the experience of name and form, Nam Roop. Okay, so Maya is, I would say, in today's language, it's a large language model. Okay, but the large language model includes physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, human imagination, feelings, thoughts, aspirations, ideas, and self reflection, everything. Okay, where is all that happening? In consciousness. So then you say it's a distraction because it's a play. It's like going to the theater where you forget the realities. The allegory of Plato's cave. You know, these people are sitting in a cave. They're seeing all these shadows on the wall, and they say, "Oh, those are those characters playing a drama." And then one of them looks behind and sees there's a light coming. That the shadows are of themselves. So everything that you experience, whether it's a book or your computer, is a shadow of yourself as a perception. There's only consciousness modifying itself as the play, which is called Leela. So why do we go to plays? Why? Because we like to be distracted. Why do you go to a movie? And if you go to a really good movie, then you're rooting for the hero, want to kill the criminal, you fall in love with the girl, and then ultimately when you leave the theater, you're still thinking about it. Okay? And all the time it was a play. All the time it was a distraction from the reality that the whole thing was Wittgenstein also said, I'm just quoting the Buddha, but Wittgenstein said, we are asleep. Our life is a dream, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we are dreaming. So once in a while, when you wake up enough to know you're dreaming, you go to the source of all experience, which is infinite creativity, infinite self-regulation, infinite entanglement, infinite evolution, self-organizing, and evolving as this theater of space-time and causality. And your body and your mind is part of this theater of space-time and causality. So who is Vasant? He's a fictional character in a collective dreamscape, as is Deepak. And the moment I realized that if I realize Deepak is not real, Vasant is not real, and the theater of space-time and causality is not real, then I want to say, then what is real? What is real is what is giving rise to this experience. Without perception and conception, you would not have this experience. And what is perception and conception? It's a modification of the one consciousness.
So even though you and I might be real, it's really imagined. It's constructed.
It's imagined. We are the imagination of ourselves, yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to get your head around.
Because we are bamboozled by hardness. You see, I'm bamboozled by hardness. I'm sitting on a table, or I'm in front of a table, which is made of steel and it's hard. So I call it matter. But hardness is a sensation in consciousness. It is not a property of matter. Anybody who knows what this table is made of steel will say, well, that's iron. Iron is an atom which is made of particles, and those particles don't exist till you observe them.
So how do we unbamboozle ourselves from this state?
Take a week and go into silence.
I was going to say, that your latest book on awakening, where you talk about these sutras 33 of them. And when I started reading it, I was actually very intrigued because you define a sutra as being like an essence. And, it made me think of, how is it different from an aphorism? How is a sutra different from an aphorism or a proverb?
Yeah, there are aphorisms, there are axioms. Even mathematics is based on axioms. So, E is equal to mc squared is just a very small equation, but it sums up a lot. So sutras, axioms, aphorisms, and it's an ancient tradition in the Upanishads. Just one sutra, you could spend a whole lifetime looking at the sutra because a lot of material is packed in it, revelation. So the word sutra actually means thread, and it's thread woven with other threads into a matrix. And in this case, the matrix is conscious agents. You as a conscious agent, you not as Vasant, but you as a conscious agent that projects what we call Vasant. But there's no Vasant. It was a fertilized egg, it was an embryo, it was a baby, it's a toddler. It's a continuous intermittent perceptual activity from fertilized egg all the way to dusty death. And before you know it, it's over in the blink of an eye. In cosmic time, it's not even a hiccup. So that leads to what the spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul, or you might say the heebie-jeebies of identity. I used to have a dream where I would find myself in a location that I could not recognize. I would look at people that I could not recognize. Then I would look for my wallet and it wasn't there. I looked for my phone, it wasn't there. And so it was like a total identity theft. Then I went into a train and somehow nobody saw me entering the train because they didn't recognize me. And I said hi to everyone. Nobody would know who I was. They would, as if I wasn't there. Then I went to the bathroom and the face I saw in the mirror was not mine. And at this point, I would panic and I would wake up. It was like a nightmare. This dream kept happening till one day, the same dream, and I went to the mirror and I saw a different face. It wasn't mine. And I was at peace with it. I realized that I've never had a face that is constant. Okay. And I've never seen a scenery that is constant. So if it's not constant, it's like a movie. The only thing was that essence of feeling I am, I exist. And that required giving up my provisional identity as Deepak Chopra, as this body, this mind, these friends, this family, and this. It's all constructed. Okay, once you take away all of this, there's something left. And that something that's left is infinite and infinite possibilities. Now, when you first encounter this, you get the so-called spiritual heebie-jeebies because you're losing your identity. And then finally you realize that you never had an identity. It was all improvised. The original identity theft is when you left the absolute identity to become this provisional identity. Yeah, and then it became peaceful after that. But until then, it was a nightmare. That's the dark night of the soul described in every tradition. Christianity, when Jesus Christ is being taken to crucifixion, Joseph of Arimathea tries to help him. He's faltering, he's carrying the cross and he's falling down. And Joseph of Arimathea, who supposedly is his uncle, says, "Let me help you." And he turns around, he says, "I have to carry my own cross." And it's true of all of us. We all have to carry our cross till we realize the truth.
So I want to come back to the sutras and why you wrote them, because there's clearly something, because I went back and looked at aphorisms, like, I don't know, look before you leap, and he who hesitates is lost. There's wisdom in those things, but that's pretty much as far as they go, right? There's not much more to say. In your 33 sutras, and I actually listed a few of them, just, as I was reading them, I said, oh, that's I want to think some more about this. Like your last one is awakening brings the end of fear. That's the last one you talk about. Why did you write these? And I'm assuming that these are your this is your synthesis.
Yeah, these are my creations, but sutra, the entire yogic literature is in the form of sutras. Okay, so they call them Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The entire yogic literature. All the Upanishads are in the form of sutras. All the verses in all the Indian philosophies are in the form of sutras. But actually, very strangely enough, if you go to the original Hebrew Bible, and if you go to Islamic revelations, they're all called revelations. And they all come in the form of verse. They don't come in the form of rational, logical statements. They come in the form of verse because they're very difficult to encapsulate as logical statements. Now, in Patanjali, what he says, and being a student of Patanjali, I totally get this. He says there are three aspects to the sutras. One is dharna. You focus on what the aphorism is or what the sutra is. That's called dharna. Then you keep that focus as a continuity. That's called dhyan, meditation. And then a time comes when you, the subject of experience, and the sutra or what it contains as knowledge and wisdom, you become one. There's no subject-object split. It's called samadhi. And at that moment, revelation dawns. And that is called revealed truth. And it is very difficult to explain in logic because logic itself is a movement of consciousness. So everything is a movement of consciousness. And so, logic cannot explain consciousness because it's a movement of consciousness. So nothing can explain consciousness because it's the source of all explanations. So, without consciousness, where is an explanation? So, so sutra is a very good technique to experience revelation. So these 33 sutras were my personal revelations in moments of silence.
Deepak, have you come across this book by Jill Bolte Taylor called My Stroke of Insight?
I am a friend of hers, and I saw her TED speech, and her experience was real. Her explanation is not real. Her experience is very real. But then she goes into left brain, right brain,
right.
Which is again,
Well, and that's what I want to get to, right? Because when I was reading Awakening, and all of the things you talk about, about sort of being in a dream and following rules and not really getting outside of that system, I was reminded of that because she talks about feeling bliss, right, when her left hemisphere was turned off. And it made me wonder whether it's this rational thinking side of our brain that gets in the way of experiencing consciousness.
Yeah, well, she has, remember, she's a neuroscientist. She has to think in terms of the brain.
Or the physical,
so
yes.
It's like the physical. But, if I told you that on your television there are so many music channels and there are other news channels, the music channels will give you joy and the news channels will cause a lot of stress, then you don't come to the conclusion that the music channel is being produced by a radio and the news channel is being produced by your radio as well. The radio has those channels through which it delivers the experience. So your brain, think of it as an instrument that records the experience in terms of neurochemistry and creates symbolic signatures of it. And when we actually perturbate the symbolic signatures, they can also reproduce the experience. But the music is not being produced by the radio, nor is the news. The music is giving you euphoria and joy, and the news is creating stress. So you don't blame the radio for that. See, she's confusing the instrument of experience with the user of the instrument. The fault of the instrument is not a reflection of the user of the instrument. Consciousness is the user of the instrument.
Right. But I guess, she is the user of the instrument, right? I mean, she's the user of her brain.
And who is she? She is consciousness.
Yes, I mean, I guess those are not reconcilable, right? If you stick to the physical system as an explanation of consciousness, then that you're within that system, right? So within that system, she's saying it's hard to still the mind because it's this left part that keeps.
Which is a good metaphor. It's not bad. But listen, even all this explanation, right brain, left brain, isn't consciousness, right? The explanation that this is happening in the brain, left brain, right brain, or there is a brain, is also an experience in consciousness. And what is that experience? It's a perceptual modification of consciousness. Okay, the brain, like anything else, it's a perceptual activity of consciousness. Now, I had a friend who would say, then you and I are the same consciousness. We are different minds, but we are the same consciousness.
Yeah, I was going to ask you the same thing. Yeah.
So he would say, this was Wayne Dyer in the old days. He says, I can wiggle my toes, but I can't wiggle your toes. Okay. I said, that is because you think you are separate from me. If you experientially felt that you and me are the same, you'd be wiggling everybody's toes. Okay. So again, that was a little difficult for him to grasp in the beginning, but here we see your mind is individual. Consciousness is not a personal property. Consciousness is non-local, without cause, impersonal, and it is modifying itself into what we call personal minds, bodies, and their respective experiences. But it itself is impersonal, just like the quantum field is impersonal. You don't say it's my quantum field, right? So why do we say it's my consciousness? You are an activity in consciousness.
I see exactly where you're coming from, and I see why those two, extreme views are not really reconcilable. Either if you believe that the physical system is the source.
Just ask yourself, who came up with the idea of matter? Okay, what is matter? Okay, even matter right now, as we understand it through quantum physics or the latest mathematical constructs, matter is made of molecules. So we say molecules are made of atoms. Atoms are made of particles, and particles wink in and out of nothingness. Okay, that nothingness ripples as particles, which end up creating the experience of the physical world. But nowhere in this argument consciousness is mentioned. It's like those particles are things independent of you and me. Well, they are not, because how do you prove? Let's say there's an observer independent world. Let's agree, naive realism is true. There's an observer independent world. How do you prove an observer world without observing it? Can you prove the existence of an observer-independent world? The answer is no. You have to have first an observation to even say it's an objective world. Where is that? And by the way, that observation is not happening in your body and mind, because your body and mind are part of the observed. How do you know that? You can observe your body. You can observe your mind. So your body, mind, and the world are entangled as the observed. Normally we say, I am the subject and the world is the object. No, you as a body mind are part of the scenery. And it's changing just like the rest of the scenery is changing. Only consciousness is what you would say, the non-changing aspect in every changing experience.
You've truly blown my mind in this conversation, Deepak, and I'm sure that of my listeners as well. You've provided a perspective on consciousness that even I can understand. So, Deepak, before we think about wrapping up, I'd love to get your take on the advice you give to young people, who seem to be very anxious and stressed. And to be fair, I think when I was younger, I was a lot more stressed because, there are these pressures of, who am I? What am I going to do with my life? Right? So stress seems to be like an inherent part of young people's lives. And, my friend Scott Galloway says, forget about having a life when you're young. Just kind of work hard and establish yourself and all of that. Forget about like a balance in life. That can come later. How do you think about this?
I think of only one thing. What is the best experience we can have in life? It's called joy. Okay? And if you haven't had joy and you made billions of dollars, what's the point? I meet everybody on this, these days at these conferences, entrepreneur conference. I met somebody who had 30 unicorns, he's multi-billionaire, and he's talking about all his exits. And I said, have you thought of your last exit? Okay. Is it going to be about unicorns or that I had a good time, that I was joyful? So joy and love and beauty go together. And I say, make joy the only measure of success. Start from there. And if you're an entrepreneur, which a lot of young people are, I give them the following advice. Is your idea unique or are you a copycat? Because Amazon was unique when it first came. Apple was unique when it first came. Then hundreds of copycats, The first automobile was unique. The first airplane was unique. The first light bulb was unique.
By the way, Google search was a copycat,
How come?
There were several search engines before them, but they were a good copycat.
But they kind of did something unique, right?
That's true.
So the first thing I say to young people is, number one, is it unique? Number two, are you an expert in it? And if you're not, then do you have a team that you can put together that is expert? Okay, and is so expert that is, for now, it's irreplaceable. Ultimately, everything is replaceable. So number one, is it unique? Number two, do you have a team who's the expert, even if you're not? Number three, is it going to change the world, make it a better place? And number four, as you pursue it, are you going to have fun? And if you can say answer to all these, I bet you'll get a unicorn too. Okay, but you start with the unicorn and then you suffer all the way and you never had any joy in the world. So make it original, get a good team, make yourself irreplaceable for the time being and say, why am I doing it? Not because I want a unicorn, but I want to make a difference in the world. And then the unicorn will come.
Yeah, you actually put it really well in that if working like crazy to make something succeed gives you joy, then that's part of the, that's part of being joyful.
Yeah, that's, eudaimonia.
Awesome. Deepak, this has been most enjoyable. Thank you for doing this and thank you for sharing your wisdom with the rest of the world. I truly appreciate it.